Hey y'all, I am out today, so here's a recording of what we're going to do. We're looking at the United States entry into World War II, things that were happening right before we entered. So let's go ahead and take a look. I'd like you to pause this video for a second and look at this image. Look at the parts, the pieces, the people, the words, the actions, and just stop and think for a minute. What do you see? What do you notice? And then think what might be the message. So go ahead and hit pause, and I'll be right here when you unpause. Okay, through the magic of pausing, you just unpaused after looking at it, and you probably noticed we have Uncle Sam. He's standing on the shores of the United States. It looks like he's kind of down there standing right on top of Georgia and Florida, looking across the Atlantic Ocean at Europe. But what is he seeing or noticing there? There's storm clouds, right? Storm clouds usually signify a storm is coming. In this case, maybe a bad storm. They're over Europe, they're over North Africa. But more importantly, what is Uncle Sam saying? He's saying it ain't what it used to be. He's not referring to the storm clouds, to Europe, but look at the Atlantic Ocean. We know that that's not geographically how close Europe and Africa are to the United States, right? So what's the message? The message is he's noticing, hey, these conflicts in Europe, they're getting closer to us. We can't just say, oh, that's over there. That's not our problem. Um, Here's something else to think about. Here we have some kind of like end of the world movies, right? These aren't World War II movies, but that idea, think about those movies and the tension that are in there. That's real life stuff that people were feeling or worried about right before World War II. Okay, so we have three dictators that will be, one will be our ally, more so a frenemy, but our ally. The other two are our opponents. So we have Adolf Hitler, and he's the leader of Germany. We have Benito Mussolini, who's the leader of Italy. And then we have Joseph Stalin, the leader of. This map is not quite accurate here, but he's the leader of the Soviet Union, which includes Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Russia, Ukraine, Moldova. So those were parts of the Soviet Union at the time. Another dictator was Japan. They had an emperor, but the emperor was maybe more like the King of England today. It doesn't really do a whole lot. It's just a figurehead. It was the military that was in charge. And so the military, the main general in the military was the one running the real show. So Hirohito was really just a figurehead. However, the Japanese viewed him as a living god, and so they would see kind of their fighting in the war as serving this living god who was their emperor. Okay, so we're going back way before World War II started. If you know your dates, World War II started in 1939 in Europe, and the U.S. entered in 1941. So going backwards, 10 years before the U.S. entered the war, Japan captured part of China. So Japan really began an offensive in the Pacific before things started in Europe, and they would continue to push through other parts of Asia, capture other island nations, target mainland Asia, but they were just kind of on the warpath. And so Hitler and Mussolini, Mussolini's in Italy, like we said, they're going to form the Axis powers, the Rome-Berlin Axis. And Japan will soon enter as well. So those will be the three Axis powers. Now, during the war, this is confusing. The Soviet Union and Germany are going to be opponents to each other. But at the beginning of the war, Hitler signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. And so what he was saying is, hey, Soviet Union, Germany will never attack you. He's going to break that promise. But we know now what he was trying to do was Hitler was going to go to his west and conquer stuff first, like France, Belgium, Netherlands, And then after he subdued them, then he would break his promise and attack the Soviet Union on his east. But as part of doing that, um, their pre-war deal, they divided up Poland. They just said, you know what, um, Soviet Union, you get part of Poland. Germany will get part of Poland, and that was the deal they had. And at the beginning, um, Germany invades the part of Poland they wanted, and the war officially begins. The British and French are like, we can't allow this to happen. We've given in to Hitler too much. So they're going to start the war. As the war starts, the United States is really staying neutral. If you remember in the 1920s, there was an isolationist movement following World War I. And again, I'd like you to pause and take a look at this cartoon. People, parts, dialogue, what's the actions that are happening. So go ahead and hit pause and we'll talk about it in just a second. I feel like one of those, now that you're back from pausing, on TV where they make something and then they pull it out of the oven already made right away, right? Kind of like that. So first thing you might notice is that this is Dr. Seuss, right? You're like, oh, I've seen this style of cartoon drawing before. Before he was making children's books and then later on TV specials that we all know and love, like The Grinch, Seuss was making political cartoons for newspapers. And what he's saying in here is he's talking about this group of Americans called America First. They were isolationists. They didn't want to get involved. But what message is Dr. Seuss saying? He's saying those America First people, like children are dying in Europe and in Asia. And Dr. Seuss is really saying, at some point, America, you can't just say, oh, that's someone else's problem. That's over there, right? He's showing the America First as being unsensitive because they're not concerned about these foreign children. Now, as this is going on, FDR is trying to stay neutral, partly because he knew even if we were going to go into the war, we weren't ready yet. And so he's going to start supplying arms to who would eventually become our allies, like to China. And then later he'll send things via the Lend-Lease Act to our European future allies. So it's kind of like we're starting to take a side before we actually get into the war. And that'll come into play with Japan attacking us in a little bit. I'm going to hit pause again, and we'll let you think about what's happening. Okay, now that you came back, I think you notice a lot here, right? We see the four dictators and what are they doing to the world, right? If you want to take some more time to pause and look at it, definitely feel free to do so, but we're going to move on. Okay, so we already talked about the Axis powers. They'll become our opponents. The allies were the Americans, the British, the French, and several other smaller countries. It's not just those four nations, because the Soviet Union, once Germany attacks them, breaks their promise, the Soviet Union will join the allies as well. So we'll have the Americans, British, French, Soviet Union, and a whole host of other smaller countries. Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Canada, and Australia, while still technically part of the British Empire, right? Those will all be our allies. And so this really will make this a world war with fighting all over the place. So here's a Venn diagram of that. And at the beginning, Germany attacks and rolls over France very quickly. And they quickly take over. Look at all the stuff in red. That's what Germany takes over. Italy controls Italy, but then you see some parts of North Africa and Southeastern Europe, Albania and Greece. And so if we're boiling it down to good guys and bad guys, the bad guys have everything in red and purple. And it's just Britain. They're more insulated because they're on an island, right? But eventually, the Germans are bombing them. The British know, hey, we need to get onto the continent. How are we going to win? And so that's kind of the situation. So things look very dire. Now, we were talking about Japan, right? What should we do? This was that, remember we said that America First aspect. But then Roosevelt's going to say, hey, we need to get ready for war. We need to start building up because we're probably going to get sucked into this. And if that's going to happen, we need to be ready. If you saw the first Captain America, you saw the very beginning of World War II. So, like we said, FDR is loaning stuff to our allies, and they call that the Lend-Lease Act. He doesn't say we're giving weapons to our future allies because that would make us not really neutral, right? So instead, Roosevelt says we're lending or we're leasing, we're letting you rent these things from us. So we can be like, hey, we're out of this. This is just a business deal for us, right? You can see in this political cartoon, right? People like Hitler and Mussolini and Tojo in Japan, they're going to be like, hey, US, we see what you're doing here, right? That's ultimately going to be one of the reasons why Japan attacks the United States. And so we have them plotting. And starting in October 1941, their expansion is continuing, but we cut off oil sales to Japan. We're like, hey, we can't fuel your war machines that are taking over innocent people in the Pacific. And so you see that perfectly in the cartoon, right? And of course, we know how important gasoline and oil is right now with the current events going on. And so Japan is upset by this, and they're going to start planning to attack us, and that will eventually be the war powers, or not the war powers, excuse me, the attack on Pearl Harbor. All right, so we're going to end with this exit ticket. We have 3 events. Go ahead and hit pause real quick and read them. Go ahead and read the answers. Think about which question is best, which one, well, first eliminate. What can you eliminate? What's a wrong answer? What's not so good? And then we'll come back in just a sec. Okay, thank you for joining us again. So we have Japan invades Korea and China. Germany invades Poland. Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. So all things happened before the U.S. entered the war. We know that. So let's see. Which title correctly replaces the question mark? So these 3 things would fit under what title? Events that encouraged the U.S. to join NATO. Events that inspired U.S. nationalism during World War I. Events that contributed to the U.S. rejecting the League of Nations, or events that led to U.S. involvement in World War II. We've been talking about it the whole time, so you're probably going to guess World War II, D, but let's think of the others. The U.S. joining NATO, that doesn't happen until after World War II, so chronologically, that's impossible. Hasn't happened yet, unless you have a time machine. Events that inspired U.S. nationalism during World War I. The U.S. was a nationalist during World War I, but that was about 20, 30 years before these things happened. So same deal with the time machine, right? These events of the 1930s can't have inspired something we did during World War I, which is in the 19-teens, so it can't be B either. C, events that contributed to the U.S. rejection of the League of Nations. The League of Nations is what came out of World War I, the proposal for a League of Nations, but Americans were isolationist, and like we said earlier, we didn't want to get involved in world affairs. So that leaves D as the best answer. That is it for us today. I know we had a short video, but I want to thank y'all for watching. Make sure you go to the homepage and look at our 2 assignments that are due this week. Please keep up with your assignments, right? We're getting almost to the end of new stuff time, right? We'll start reviewing for STAR soon. So make sure you stay caught up on assignments. If you have any questions, please email, call, or text me. Thank you.